A quiet life, an unexpected invitation. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee, usually a morning balm, offered Alex no solace today. Instead, it merely amplified the apartment's oppressive silence, a quiet that pressed in rather than comforted. He sat at his kitchen table, the newspaper untouched, his spoon's gentle clatter against ceramic the only punctuation in the stillness. Another Tuesday, another day poised to mirror the last, and the one before that. His freelance editing career, with its quiet immersion in others' words, generally suited him. Yet on mornings like these, the solitude felt less like peace and more like a void. He considered calling Sarah, his sister, but envisioned her swamped by her children. His handful of friends, scattered across time zones, led lives vibrant and full, sometimes making him feel like a distant satellite in their bustling orbits. He was a good listener, a steadfast presence, but often felt like an observer in his own existence, watching it unfold from a comfortable, if somewhat isolated, vantage point. A laptop notification pinged, yanking him from his thoughts. Northwood High Class of 2014, 10-year reunion. He nearly deleted it. Reunions always struck him as an exercise in performative success, a contest he had no desire to enter. He'd kept in touch with few from high school, having been the quiet kid who preferred books to boisterous crowds. Yet an inexplicable impulse made him click it open. The email was standard fare. Date, time, venue, a slightly saccharine photo montage of smiling faces from a decade past. Below the registration link, a section titled "Who's Coming?" displayed updated profile pictures. He scrolled idly, a faint smile touching his lips at the sight of a few familiar, if slightly older, visages. There was Chloe, still radiating infectious energy, now a doctor, and Ben, embodying the successful lawyer he'd always vowed to be. Then his finger froze on the trackpad. There, amidst polished headshots and family snapshots, was Mark Jenkins. But this wasn't the gangly, slightly awkward Mark from science class, the one who'd been a little too loud and a little too eager. This Mark was transformed. The photo showed him in a crisp military uniform, dark green fabric taut across broad shoulders. His hair, cropped short, revealed a strong jawline, and his eyes, once playful and a touch unfocused, now held an intensity, a quiet confidence that was startling. He looked lean, powerful, utterly changed. A faint scar traced his left eyebrow, a tiny testament to a life lived far beyond Northwood High's quiet halls. Alex leaned closer to the screen, a genuine flicker of curiosity sparking within him. Mark had always been a whirlwind of restless energy, a force of nature, but Alex had never envisioned him like this, a soldier. The disciplined posture, the unwavering gaze, it starkly contrasted with the boy who'd once nearly torched the chemistry lab during an ill-fated experiment. He felt a pang he couldn't quite identify. Not regret, precisely, but a subtle ache for the years that had passed, the divergent pathways. He thought of his own life, quiet and contained, then of Mark's, seemingly forged in fire and discipline. It made him wonder what stories Mark carried, what experiences had etched that new resolve into his face. The thought of facing a room full of familiar strangers still felt daunting. The small talk, the forced smiles, the inevitable inquiries about his life's trajectory, it all seemed an uphill battle. He considered simply ignoring the email, letting the date slip by. But then Mark's image resurfaced, that almost defiant glint in his eyes. What would it be like to see him now? To hear about his journey? It wasn't just Mark, either. He found himself wondering about others. Had Sarah Miller finally pursued her art? Was David Chen still unleashing those terrible puns? The email, initially a nuisance, now felt like a portal, a chance to glimpse the lives that had spun out from that shared starting point. A tentative smile touched Alex's lips. It was a risk, stepping out of his comfort zone, enduring the potential awkwardness. But maybe, just maybe, it was a risk worth taking. He clicked the registration link, filling out the form with a newfound sense of purpose. He paused at the photo upload, debating, then chose a relatively recent selfie where he looked approachable, a little tired around the eyes but genuine. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply presenting himself as he was. 10 years on. He confirmed his attendance, a surprising flutter in his chest. The quiet hum of his apartment no longer felt like a burden. It felt like anticipation. For the first time in a long while, the upcoming days promised something genuinely unexpected. He picked up his coffee, warmth seeping into his hands, and wondered what stories his old classmates, especially Mark, would have to tell. A glimpse of the soldier. The hum of 100 conversations, each one vying for attention, pressed in on Alex as he stepped into the rented hall. It was louder than he'd anticipated, a chaotic symphony of rekindled friendships and polite pleasantries. He immediately felt the familiar urge to retreat, to find a quiet corner and fade into the background. But then across the room, past the glittering balloons and the long buffet tables laden with forgotten high school favourites, he saw him, Mark Jenkins. He stood near the edge of the dance floor, a glass of something amber held loosely in one hand. Even in the dim lighting of the hall, his presence was undeniable. The casual button-down shirt he wore, dark blue and subtly patterned, couldn't quite disguise the broadness of his shoulders or the disciplined bearing of his posture. He wasn't overtly performing, wasn't commanding attention with loud gestures or boisterous laughter. Instead, he simply was. There was an understated authority in the way he held himself, a quiet confidence that seemed to emanate from him, drawing the occasional glance, the subtle shift of attention from those nearby. The scar, a pale line tracing across his temple, was more visible up close, a subtle testament to experiences Alex could only guess at. He watched as a former cheerleader, still impossibly youthful, approached Mark, her smile bright and insistent. Mark returned a polite, almost formal nod, his expression unreadable, before she moved on, a hint of disappointment in her step. Alex felt a strange mix of apprehension and curiosity churn within him. Mark was exactly as he'd appeared in the photo, only more so. The online image had been a two-dimensional tease. In person, the transformation was a living, breathing testament to a life lived far beyond the confines of their sleepy hometown. It sparked a flicker of something in Alex, a desire to understand, to bridge the gap between the awkward boy he remembered and the composed man before him. He was still debating the wisdom of approaching, of wading into the social fray, when Mark's gaze swept across the room and landed on him. For a moment, Alex felt exposed, caught in the act of observation. But then a slow smile spread across Mark's face, a genuine warmth that softened the disciplined lines of his features. He pushed off the wall and began to walk, a steady, unhurried pace, directly toward Alex. "Alex," Mark said, his voice a low rumble, surprisingly gentle as he extended a hand. His grip was firm, warm, and brief. "It's good to see you. Didn't think you'd make it." Alex felt a blush creep up his neck. "Yeah, well, decide to brave the crowds. You too. You look good, Mark." He fumbled for words, the compliment feeling inadequate, almost childish, in the face of Mark's commanding presence. Mark chuckled, a deep, easy sound. "The army's good for some things, I guess. Keeps you in shape, if nothing else." He gestured around the room. "Quite a turnout. A lot of faces I haven't seen in years." "Definitely," Alex agreed, feeling a surprising ease settle between them. "I saw your photo online, actually. You've been overseas, right?" "For a while, yeah," Mark confirmed, his expression becoming a touch more guarded, though his eyes remained kind. "Multiple deployments, just got back a few months ago. Figured it was time for a break, maybe figure out what's next." "Must have been intense," Alex ventured, searching for the right word. He remembered the vague news reports, the images on television, but they felt a million miles away from the mundane reality of his own life. Mark nodded, a slight dip of his head. "It had its moments, taught me a lot, though, about priorities, about what really matters." He took a sip of his drink, his gaze distant for a moment before returning to Alex. "And you? Still holed up with books and words, I imagine?" Alex managed a small smile. "More or less. Freelance editing. Keeps me busy, at least." He felt a familiar pang of inadequacy, a sudden awareness of the stark contrast between his quiet, solitary life and Mark's undoubtedly eventful, high-stakes existence. "Always were the quiet one, the thoughtful one," Mark mused, a hint of genuine nostalgia in his voice. "Good at that, I bet." The casual compliment, unexpected and sincere, warmed something in Alex. He'd often felt overlooked, his contributions unseen. Coming from Mark, it felt like a small, unexpected affirmation. It's steady, Alex admitted. So you're just back, then, from everything? Mark's smile faded slightly, replaced by a more serious expression. Yeah, just back. Trying to reacclimate. It's a different kind of fight. Coming home. He looked past Alex, his gaze briefly lingering on the bustling dance floor, the carefree laughter of their former classmates. But it's good to be here. For a little while. Good to see some familiar faces. He met Alex's eyes again, and in that brief, unguarded moment, Alex thought he saw a flicker of something deeper in Mark's gaze. A weariness, perhaps, or a quiet longing. Well, it's good to see you too, Mark, Alex said, meaning it. The conversation had been brief, polite, and largely superficial, but it had been a start. It had been more than he'd anticipated, and certainly more than he'd expected from the man who was now, unmistakably, a soldier. An unexpected roommate. The insistent trill of Alex's phone shattered the evening's quietude. Sarah's name blazed on the screen. He answered, a faint frown etching his brow. Her late-night calls typically heralded some impending crisis. Alex! Perfect timing. Sarah's voice chirped, a gale of energy even through the receiver. Listen, this is completely out of left field, but I need a massive favour. Alex braced himself. Sarah's requests often involved elaborate stratagems or 11th-hour predicaments. What's up, Sarah? It's about Mark, she continued, her tone softening. He's back, from everything. His old place? Gone. Landlord apparently rented it out while he was deployed. Classic move. He's been crashing with his aunt, but her house is packed, and Mark needs his own space. He's looking for something temporary, just until he gets his bearings. Maybe a month or two. Alex's mind instantly conjured the almost surgical precision of Mark at their reunion. The subtle scar, the quiet authority. A soldier. The notion of him inhabiting Alex's cosy, somewhat cluttered apartment felt dissonant. And why are you telling me this? Sarah heaved a dramatic sigh. Because, my dear Alex, you possess a spare room, and you're practically a saint. Mark needs a tranquil haven, a sane environment. Not a party house. He mentioned you were one of the few who didn't interrogate him at the reunion, which he apparently appreciated. Alex massaged the back of his neck. Sarah, I don't know. We barely exchanged words, and I'm hardly set up for a housemate. His spare room served primarily as a graveyard for old books and forgotten art supplies. Please, Alex, consider it a kindness. He's endured so much. He just needs a soft place to land. Honestly, you two share more common ground than you realise. Quiet, introspective types. It'll be ideal. Sarah's infectious enthusiasm began to erode Alex's resolve. He pictured Mark's measured gaze, the genuine warmth in his smile despite his evident reserve. Perhaps it wouldn't be so bad. He sighed, vanquished by Sarah's unyielding optimism. All right, fine. Tell him to call me. A triumphant whoop reverberated from the phone. You're the absolute best, Alex. I knew I could depend on you. 2 days later, Mark arrived. Alex had spent the interim in a flurry of domesticity, excavating the spare room, banishing dust from neglected surfaces, striving to imbue the space with an air of welcoming order. When Mark appeared, he wore a simple t-shirt and jeans, carrying a single duffel and a well-worn rucksack. No uniform, no rigid bearing, yet the current of contained power remained, a subtle thrum beneath his relaxed exterior. Hey, Alex. Thanks for this, Mark said, his voice a low resonance. He offered a small, sincere smile that reached his eyes. No problem, Alex replied, stepping aside. Come in. It's not grand, but it's clean. Mark entered, and suddenly Alex's apartment seemed to shrink, infused with a new, potent presence. A faint, clean scent clung to him, fresh linen and a whisper of pine, a stark contrast to Alex's typical aroma of aged paper and coffee. Mark's gaze swept the living room with quick, efficient assessment. Then he followed Alex down the short corridor to the spare room. He deposited his bags with a soft thud and looked around. This is excellent, Alex. Truly. More than I anticipated. Over the ensuing days, Alex found himself observing Mark with a quiet fascination. Mark was a creature of routine, a silent, efficient mechanism. His mornings commenced before Alex's alarm, marked by the faint, rhythmic thud of running shoes on pavement, then the soft clang of weights in his room. By the time Alex emerged, coffee brewing, Mark would already be showered, dressed, and often engrossed in a book at the kitchen table, a steaming mug of black tea beside him. His spare room, once a repository of forgotten objects, now epitomized minimalist organization. His clothes lay neatly folded in the small dresser, his few books arranged by height on the shelf Alex had cleared. The apartment's atmosphere felt altered, crisper, less Alex-centric. A subtle order had been introduced, not overtly, but through Mark's very essence. One evening, Alex was preparing dinner, stirring pasta sauce, when Mark entered the kitchen. "Smells good," he remarked, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Thanks," Alex said, a familiar shyness pricking him. "You're welcome to join, if you'd like." Mark pushed off the frame, moving to the counter. "Appreciate it. I make a killer garlic bread." Thus began shared meals. Tranquil evenings spent reading in separate corners of the living room, the occasional late-night conversation about nothing in particular. The initial awkwardness gradually receded, replaced by a comfortable cadence, a tentative camaraderie Alex hadn't foreseen. Mark's presence, once a jarring concept, was beginning to feel less like an imposition and more like a quiet ballast in Alex's often adrift daily life. The apartment, once solely Alex's domain, was subtly morphing into a shared space, its identity shifting with each passing day. Shared spaces, shared moments. The scent of brewing coffee and warm toast acted as the morning's unspoken truce. Alex, habitually a solo breakfast eater, now unconsciously laid out an extra mug and a second plate. Mark, ever precise, was typically showered and dressed by the time Alex ambled into the kitchen, his hair still in sleepy disarray. Their mornings unfolded in a comfortable quiet, broken only by the soft chime of cutlery and the occasional rustle of newsprint. Mark, unexpectedly, gravitated to the sports section, a detail that gently chipped away at Alex's imposing mental picture of a stoic military man. Evenings, too, settled into a familiar cadence. After a few initial, tentative suggestions, movie nights became an unspoken ritual. Alex would navigate streaming options, Mark interjecting with concise, often droll, critiques of the synopses. He harboured a surprising fondness for cheesy 80s action films, a preference that once sparked a spirited, if one-sided debate about the merits of practical effects versus CGI. Alex noticed himself laughing more freely, the steady hum of Mark's presence a soothing counterpoint to the apartment's usual silence. One Saturday, Alex grappled with a stubbornly dripping bathroom faucet, muttering under his breath. He'd devoured countless DIY videos, yet the obstinate fixture refused to cooperate. Mark, picking up on the muffled frustration, appeared in the doorway, a towel slung over his shoulder, a silent question in his eyes. "Stuck," Alex admitted, smearing grease on his jeans. "Plumbing remains an enigma to me." Mark assessed the situation, his gaze sharp and methodical. "Mind if I take a look?" Before Alex could respond, Mark was kneeling, a small toolkit materializing from what must have been his unpacked belongings. His hands, usually so composed, moved with unexpected agility. He calmly narrated each step as he tightened a fitting, swapped out a washer, and sealed a joint. Within 20 minutes, the drip was gone, replaced by the satisfying, silent hum of a properly functioning faucet. "How did you know all that?" Alex asked, genuinely impressed. Mark shrugged, wiping his hands on a rag. "Basic repairs are part of the training. Resourcefulness is key in the field." He paused, a faint smile touching his lips. "Plus my dad was a plumber. Picked up a few things." It was a small disclosure, a fleeting glimpse into the man beneath the uniform, and Alex found himself curious for more. A different sort of warmth bloomed in his chest, not merely relief about the faucet, but a genuine appreciation for this quiet, capable man. Later that week, during a particularly drawn-out documentary about ancient civilizations, Mark let out a dramatic sigh. "You know," he began, a twinkle in his eye, "this reminds me of my first week in basic. They tried to teach us knot tying, and I, I've always been good at everything, couldn't get it right." Alex turned, surprised by the unexpected confession. Really? You seem incredibly coordinated. Oh, I am now, Mark chuckled, a surprisingly rich and full sound. But back then, I kept tying these ridiculous knots that looked more like bird nests. Drill Sergeant Miller, a man who could intimidate a grizzly bear, took one look at my attempt and said, "Soldier, are you trying to knit a sweater for a squirrel or secure a parachute?" Alex burst out laughing, a genuine, uninhibited sound. He hadn't heard Mark laugh like that before, and the sight of his usually stern features softened by amusement was captivating. "He made me stay, after hours, every night, for a week," Mark continued, his own smile widening, "just tying knots. Eventually I got it, but for a while I was convinced I was going to be the guy who accidentally untied his own bootlaces during a sprint." The story, simple as it was, felt momentous. It was a crack in the disciplined facade, a hint of vulnerability, and a shared moment of laughter that echoed long after the documentary credits rolled. Alex found himself observing Mark differently, seeing not just a soldier but a man with a rich history, a sense of humour, and an unexpected capacity for connection. The apartment, once Alex's solitary refuge, now felt like a shared space, subtly yet profoundly transformed by Mark's quiet, steady presence. The initial apprehension had completely melted away, replaced by a burgeoning comfort, a sense of ease Alex hadn't realised he'd been lacking. He found himself anticipating their shared breakfasts, the late-night movies, and the small, unexpected revelations that slowly began to intertwine their lives. A flicker of connection. The intoxicating scent of buttered popcorn, a hallmark of their Friday movie nights, permeated the apartment. Alex's fingers brushed Mark's as they simultaneously reached for a plump kernel, a fleeting spark, a quiet jolt. Mark's hand recoiled, a blush creeping up his neck. Alex felt a similar warmth bloom on his own cheeks. The unspoken awkwardness hung like a buttery fog. Mark cleared his throat, a soft "sorry" escaping him. "No, me too," Alex mumbled, scooping a handful of popcorn, the salty crunch a welcome diversion. The film, an outrageous 80s action flick Mark had unearthed, reclaimed its chaotic rhythm. But that brief contact lingered, a curious warmth on Alex's fingertips. For the rest of the evening, an unfamiliar awareness of Mark's presence hummed beneath their usual easy camaraderie. Later, a sharp cry tore through the apartment's quietude. Alex shot upright, heart thundering. A guttural sound, followed by a torrent of urgent, garbled words. It was Mark. Alex swung his legs out of bed, the cool wooden floor a stark contrast to his racing pulse. He padded silently to Mark's door, which stood ajar. Through the narrow gap, he heard frantic thrashing, heavy, ragged breaths, and another pained groan. Without hesitation, Alex pushed the door open. Mark thrashed in bed, a prisoner of his sheets, his face a mask of silent terror. Sweat plastered his hair to his forehead, and his eyes, though open, gazed into a terrifying abyss. He was calling out, a jumble of military jargon and desperate pleas that fractured the night. "Cover me! No! Get down!" he yelled, his voice raw and broken. "Mark!" Alex's voice was a quiet but firm anchor in the storm. He approached the bed cautiously, not wanting to intensify the nightmare. "Mark, wake up! You're dreaming!" Mark continued to struggle, his hands flailing as if fending off an unseen enemy. Alex extended a gentle hand, resting it on Mark's shoulder. The contact seemed to pierce the nightmare's veil. Mark gasped, his body tensing, then slowly yielding. His eyes, now focused, met Alex's, wide and disoriented. "Alex!" he mumbled, his voice raspy. He blinked, taking in his familiar room, the soft glow of streetlights filtering through the blinds. The tension slowly drained from him, replaced by a profound weariness. "You were having a nightmare," Alex explained, his hand still a silent anchor on Mark's shoulder. He felt the tremor in Mark's muscles, the lingering fear clinging like a shroud. Mark pushed himself up, running a hand through his damp hair. He looked away, his gaze fixed on some distant, unseen point. "Right," he said, barely a whisper. "Sorry. Didn't mean to wake you." Alex sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress yielding slightly under his weight. "Don't apologise. he said softly. He studied Mark's profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the faint shadows beneath his eyes. This was a vulnerability Alex hadn't witnessed before, a fissure in the controlled facade Mark usually presented. It was unsettling, yet it drew Alex in, stirring a protective impulse he hadn't anticipated. Mark finally turned, his eyes still clouded with the nightmare's residue, but also a flicker of something else. Embarrassment, a deep-seated shame. It happens sometimes, he confessed, his voice a low, shared secret. Basic training, what you see, it sticks with you. He chuckled humorlessly, a dry, brittle sound, even when you're not there anymore. Alex felt a pang of empathy, a deep ache in his chest. He longed to offer solace, but words failed him. Instead, he simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement. The air between them, usually so comfortable and light, now held a new weight, a shared vulnerability, and that weight felt strangely intimate. Mark, sensing Alex's unspoken support, finally met his gaze. The lingering fear in his eyes slowly receded, replaced by a different kind of openness. In that shared silence, under the muted glow of the streetlights, a new layer of their connection solidified, a thread woven not from laughter or shared interests, but from the raw, exposed edges of their humanity. Unspoken stories. The morning after, a strange quiet settled over the house. Alex woke to sunlight streaming through his window, the dream's lingering echo a faint hum in his chest. He found Mark in the living room, perched on the edge of the worn armchair, a shoebox open on his lap. Scattered around him on the floor were a dozen or so faded photographs. Mark's brow was furrowed, a distant, almost mournful look in his eyes as he traced a finger over one of the images. "Morning," Alex said softly, Mark starting slightly at the sound. Mark offered a small, hesitant smile. "Morning, Alex. Didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't," Alex replied, stepping closer. He saw then what Mark was looking at, pictures of young men in various stages of military fatigues, some smiling awkwardly, others with a grim determination. Mark, younger and leaner, was in many of them, his posture already squared, a nascent intensity in his gaze. "Old army photos?" Alex asked, pulling up a footstool to sit opposite him. Mark nodded, picking up a shot of him and 3 other soldiers, their faces smudged with dirt, a wide, triumphant grin splitting his face. "Yeah, just looking back." His voice was low, laced with an emotion Alex couldn't quite decipher, a mixture of pride and profound sorrow. "It's weird how much changes and how much just stays with you." Alex watched him, a feeling of protectiveness stirring. He remembered the raw vulnerability of Mark's nightmare, the way he'd clung to Alex, a man transformed by terror. "It must have been hard," Alex ventured, careful with his words. "Everything you went through." Mark's gaze drifted to the window, unfocused. "Hard isn't the word for it, Alex. It was a different world. A world where you make choices you never thought you'd have to. Where you see things you wish you could unsee." He picked up another photo, this one of a group laughing, arms thrown over shoulders. "These guys, they were my family. More than family sometimes." He paused, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Some of them didn't come home." A lump formed in Alex's throat. He reached out, his hand hovering for a moment before gently resting on Mark's forearm. "I'm sorry, Mark." Mark flinched almost imperceptibly at the touch, then slowly turned his hand over, his fingers brushing against Alex's. The contact was brief, yet it resonated, a silent acknowledgement of the weight of Mark's unspoken stories. "It's part of the deal, I guess," Mark said, pulling his hand away, though his expression softened. "You sign up, you know the risks, but knowing doesn't make it easier when it happens." Later that afternoon, they found themselves walking through the sprawling city park, the late autumn air crisp and invigorating. Fallen leaves crunched underfoot, a symphony of reds and golds. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the earlier conversation still hanging in the air between them. Finally, Mark broke the quiet. "There was this one time," he began, his voice hesitant. "We were on patrol, deep in hostile territory. Everything was quiet, almost too quiet. Then a flash, an explosion, and suddenly we were in it." He paused, his gaze fixed on a distant flock of birds taking flight. My squad leader, Sergeant Miller, he was hit bad. Shrapnel everywhere. I thought he was gone. Alex listened intently, his heart pounding in a rhythm mimicking Mark's narrative. This was new, a depth of sharing Mark hadn't offered before. I dragged him behind cover, yelling for a medic, but we were cut off. It was just me and him, and the enemy closing in. Mark's voice tightened. He looked at me, his eyes wide with pain, and he said, "Go. Get out of here, son. Save yourself." A tremor ran through Mark's frame. I couldn't leave him, so I fought. I kept them off us, inch by agonizing inch, until backup arrived. Alex stopped walking, turning to face Mark fully. The raw emotion on Mark's face was unmistakable. "You saved him?" Mark nodded, a faint sad smile gracing his lips. "I did, but he never fully recovered. Lost a leg, lost an eye. He told me later he wished I'd listened, wished I'd saved myself, said it wasn't worth it." Mark finally met Alex's gaze, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "But how do you leave someone behind? How do you make that choice?" Alex reached out without hesitation this time, placing a hand gently on Mark's shoulder. "You did what you had to do, Mark. You saved a life. That's a sacrifice, but it's also an act of incredible courage." He squeezed Mark's shoulder, a silent promise of understanding and acceptance. The unspoken stories were finally finding a voice, weaving a stronger, more intricate thread between them. Blurring lines, the bedside clock's numbers, a soft, insistent crimson, announced 2:17 a.m. Alex stared. The refrigerator's distant thrum a familiar counterpoint to the quiet. The night had stretched far beyond his usual bedtime, drawn out by Mark's stories, a rich unspooling current once released. Their conversation had drifted from old photographs to abstract discussions of difficult choices, culminating in the daunting blank canvas of Mark's present. I don't know what comes next," Mark confessed, his voice a low timbre in the dim living room. He perched on the worn armchair's edge, an almost defensive readiness even in repose. Before, it was always laid out, orders, missions, the next deployment. Now it's this. A vague sweep of his hand encompassed the room, followed by a small, self-deprecating chuckle. This quiet, this freedom. Alex, curled on the sofa, tightened the old throw around him. "Freedom can be a heavy thing," he mused, reflecting on his own carefully constructed solitude, "especially when you've been shouldering so much." He observed Mark's profile, stark against the faint moonlight filtering through the blinds. The strong jaw, the slight furrow in his brow, hinting at private anxieties. "It's more than just that," Mark continued, picking at a loose thread on his jeans. "It's what do I actually want? I excelled at what I did. I kept people alive. But that's not exactly a marketable skill for civilian life, is it? Not in a way that feels right." His shoulders slumped. A rare crack in his composure that resonated deep within Alex. A strange warmth began to unfurl in Alex's chest, a sensation he couldn't quite label. Not pity, precisely. It felt more like a protective urge, a desire to smooth away Mark's worries, to offer assurances he didn't possess himself. He yearned to reach out, a comforting touch, but hesitated, unsure of the unspoken boundaries. "You're capable of so much, Mark," Alex offered instead, his voice softer than intended. "You're loyal, brave, thoughtful. Those qualities hold immense value, regardless of the setting." Mark turned his head, their gazes locking in the near darkness. There was a directness in Mark's eyes that always unsettled Alex, a knack for piercing his carefully cultivated reserve. "You think so?" Mark asked, a genuine thread of curiosity in his tone. "I do," Alex affirmed, maintaining eye contact. A blush crept up his neck, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. The air in the room thickened, charged with an unspoken understanding, transcending their words. It was a connection forged in shared quiet, in glimpsed wounds, in the unexpected solace of their mutual presence. As moments stretched, Alex became acutely aware of minute details. The steady rhythm of Mark's breathing, The faint scent of pine mingled with something subtly masculine that clung to him. The way moonlight caught the silver in his short hair. This was more than a friend staying over, more than a former classmate. This was Mark, raw and uncertain, and an unfamiliar tenderness bloomed within Alex. He cleared his throat, breaking the spell. "You'll figure it out, Mark. You always do." Mark offered a small, hesitant smile. "I hope so. It helps, talking about it. With you." The admission sent another ripple through Alex. He'd meticulously guarded his space, his solitude, for so long. Yet with Mark, the ramparts seemed to be dissolving, almost imperceptibly. He found himself anticipating these late-night conversations, the way Mark's presence filled the quiet corners of his life. He found himself enjoying it, more than enjoying it, perhaps. Later, after Mark had finally retreated and the house settled into a deeper stillness, Alex lay awake. The warmth in his chest persisted, a confusing, insistent glow. He replayed their conversation, Mark's confessions, his own responses. Then he replayed the way Mark had looked at him, the almost imperceptible softening around his eyes. What was happening? He'd always prided himself on emotional detachment, on keeping people at arm's length. But with Mark, those carefully drawn lines blurred, smudged by shared vulnerability and an unexpected sense of belonging. The thought, unwelcome and startling, surfaced from the depths. Is this attraction? The word felt foreign, almost alien, applied to himself and especially to Mark, the embodiment of discipline and masculine strength he'd known since high school. But the feeling, undeniable and potent, was there, and it terrified him. A silent question. The late hour had bled into early morning, the world outside still cloaked in the quiet of pre-dawn. Alex lay on his back, the ceiling a canvas for his racing thoughts. Mark's raw vulnerability, a stark contrast to the composed soldier he'd known, had etched itself into Alex's consciousness. The uncertainty in Mark's eyes, the quiet admission of feeling adrift, had stirred something fiercely protective in Alex, a sensation both unfamiliar and unsettling. And then there was the other feeling, the one that coiled hot and insistent in his gut, a magnetic pull he couldn't name, couldn't reconcile with his carefully constructed emotional detachment. He shifted, the rustle of sheets loud in the stillness. Across the room, Mark was also awake, staring at the ceiling, a wave of shared insomnia, a silent understanding. Alex turned his head, drawn by an invisible thread. Mark, as if sensing the movement, shifted his gaze. Their eyes met, and for a beat too long, the air thickened with an unspoken question. It wasn't accusatory, nor particularly curious. It was a deep, searching look, a silent inquiry into the space between them, the shifting ground beneath their feet. Alex felt a flush creep up his neck, an involuntary response to the intensity in Mark's gaze. He quickly looked away, feigning sudden interest in the patterned shadows on the wall. Mark, too, eventually broke the connection, but the moment lingered, a phantom touch. He rolled onto his side, facing Alex's back, though Alex couldn't see him. A sigh escaped Mark's lips, soft and heavy. The freedom he'd yearned for now felt like an endless, empty plain. He missed the structure, the purpose, the unshakable certainty of his role. Yet in the quiet of this new life, in this shared space with Alex, a different kind of certainty was beginning to bloom. He'd always considered himself a man of action, straightforward and uncomplicated. The military had reinforced that, streamlining his emotions into a manageable, focused drive. But around Alex, those neat lines were blurring. He found himself smiling more, a genuine, unforced upturn of his lips that surprised him with its frequency. He laughed at Alex's dry wit, felt a quiet ease settle over him during their shared meals, and found himself anticipating their evening conversations with an almost childish eagerness. The feeling was happiness, a quiet, steady hum of contentment that resonated deep in his chest. It was a foreign sensation, not the fleeting joy of a successful mission or the camaraderie of his unit, but something softer, more personal. He'd never considered himself a particularly happy person before, not in this soft, domestic way. He'd been content, certainly, fulfilled by his duty. But this was different. This was a warmth that spread through him, chasing away the chill of uncertainty, a light in the disorienting fog of his new civilian life. He thought back to earlier, to Alex's intense gaze, the way their eyes had locked. There had been something there, something that had resonated deep within Mark, a stirring he couldn't quite identify. It wasn't lust, not in the way he understood it, not the straightforward physical desire he'd occasionally experienced. This was softer, more intricate, a subtle pull that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. It made him question things, not just about his future, but about himself, his assumptions, his carefully constructed identity as a straight man who would one day settle down with a woman and have a conventional life. That picture, once so clear, now felt incomplete, or perhaps wrong. A different image was slowly, tentatively forming in its place, one that had Alex at its centre, his quiet presence a grounding force, his sharp mind a fascinating challenge, his subtle affection a balm to Mark's weary soul. The thought sent a jolt through him, an almost electric current of confusion and a strange, nascent excitement. He didn't know what this feeling was, but he knew with a sudden unnerving clarity that it was important, and it was changing him. The truth within Mark awoke with a jolt, the phantom weight of a rifle still heavy in his hands, a familiar phantom limb sensation that lingered long after he'd left the service. The pre-dawn quiet of Alex's house was a stark contrast to the cacophony of his military past, yet his mind raced with a different kind of urgency. It wasn't the tactical scenarios or the echoes of distant gunfire that disturbed his peace now. It was Alex. He rolled onto his back, staring at the ceiling, the truth hitting him with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just friendship, not just a deep camaraderie born of shared space and quiet understanding. The protective instinct he'd felt, the way Alex's vulnerability had resonated within him, the electric current that had arced between their gazes, it was all coalescing into something undeniable, something he'd never anticipated. He was in love with Alex. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. His entire life he'd operated under the assumption of a clear, unassailable trajectory, military career, then a stable, conventional life with a wife and kids. He'd dated women, gone through the motions, never questioning the inherent straightness of his existence. Society had affirmed it, his family had expected it, and he had never had cause to doubt it. Now it felt like the earth had shifted beneath his feet, revealing a chasm where solid ground used to be. The comfortable blueprint of his future had been shredded, replaced by a bewildering, exhilarating blank canvas. He threw the covers back, the sudden chill of the room a welcome distraction from the inferno in his mind. He paced the small guest room, a restless energy coursing through him. How could this be? He was Mark, the soldier, the man who always knew his place, his purpose. This felt like a mutiny within his own soul. Every lingering touch, every late-night conversation, every shared laugh now replayed in his mind, imbued with a new, potent meaning. The way Alex's eyes crinkled when he smiled, the quiet intensity of his focus when he was lost in thought, the sheer warmth of his presence. It wasn't just appealing, it was captivating, drawing Mark in like a moth to a flame. He picked up his phone, the glowing screen a beacon in the dim room. He needed to talk to someone who wouldn't judge, who might offer some semblance of understanding to the chaos within him. Dr. Thorne. He was a good man, seen a lot, heard a lot. He'd helped Mark navigate the immediate aftermath of his return, the disorientation and the simmering anger. Perhaps he could help with this too. The next afternoon, Mark found himself in Dr. Thorne's office, the muted hum of the air conditioning a stark contrast to the internal storm he was weathering. Dr. Thorne, calm and composed behind his desk, offered a gentle smile. "Mark, good to see you. How are things settling in?" Mark shifted in his seat, his gaze fixed on a framed photograph of a serene mountain landscape on the wall. "It's complicated, Doc. Things are settling, but in ways I didn't expect." He took a deep breath, the confession a knot in his throat. "It's about Alex." Dr. Thorne nodded, his expression unreadable, yet attentive. "Alex. He seems to be a significant part of your transition back. Is he creating new challenges, or helping you navigate old ones?" "Both, I think," Mark admitted, the words tumbling out. He's everything I didn't know I needed. And I've realized I'm in love with him, Doc. Silence hung in the air, thick and heavy. Mark braced himself for a reaction, for judgment, for anything that would confirm the monumental shift he felt. But Dr. Thorne merely leaned back, his gaze steady and empathetic. "And how does that realization sit with you, Mark?" "It's disorienting," Mark confessed, running a hand through his hair. "My whole life, I've been straight. Or at least I thought I was. I never questioned it, never imagined this. And now this feeling, it's intense and it's real. But it clashes with everything I ever thought about myself, about my future, about who I'm supposed to be." He looked at Dr. Thorne, a raw plea in his eyes. "Is this normal, Doc? Am I losing my mind?" "Doctor," Thorne's voice was gentle, devoid of any hint of surprise or condemnation. "Mark, our understanding of ourselves, especially our emotional and romantic selves, can evolve. Sometimes it takes a unique connection, a profound experience, to reveal aspects of ourselves we never knew existed. There's no normal in matters of the heart, only what is true for you. And what you're feeling, that disorientation, that questioning of past assumptions, that's perfectly natural when confronted with a truth that challenges your established identity." He paused, offering a reassuring smile. It takes courage to acknowledge something so fundamental, especially when it goes against what you've always believed. "What do you feel when you're with him?" Mark closed his eyes, picturing Alex, recalling the warmth, the laughter, the quiet strength. "I feel at peace and alive, like I'm finally home." The words hung in the air, undeniable. A confession and a beginning. The biting morning air did little to quell the internal maelstrom gripping Mark. He perched on his bed's edge, the meticulously smoothed quilt, a stark counterpoint to his churning thoughts. Dr. Thorne's conversation echoed, her calm, steady tone slicing through his denial, exposing a truth he'd stubbornly resisted. Love. The word felt alien, exhilarating, and terrifying all at once. For Alex. His Alex. He drifted through the past few days in a haze, a detached observer of his own existence. Every shared meal, every quiet evening spent reading, every fleeting glance with Alex now carried a new, almost unbearable weight. The way Alex's brow furrowed in concentration over a book, the soft, melodic hum he sometimes made brewing coffee, the comfortable silence that had become their shared language. All of it had been recontextualized, imbued with a tenderness that gnawed at Mark's carefully constructed composure. He knew he couldn't hoard this. It wasn't a minor secret, a trivial detail to be buried. This was foundational. It reshaped the entire landscape of their dynamic, of all they could become. The thought of cohabiting, of sharing these intimate domestic moments while harbouring such profound feelings, Alex blissfully unaware, felt like a betrayal. A slow, agonizing suffocation of the spirit. Fear, cold and sharp, needled him. Fear of rejection, yes, but more acutely, fear of shattering the delicate peace they had built. Fear of irrevocably altering the dynamic that, despite his internal turmoil, had offered more solace than he'd ever imagined. Alex had provided sanctuary, a quiet harbour in the storm of his post-military life. What if this confession capsized it all? What if he lost not just a potential future, but the comfortable present? He moved to the window, watching a lone sparrow hop along an oak branch, its cheerful song a distant counterpoint to the heaviness in his chest. The decision, though agonizing, was crystal clear. Honesty was paramount. With Alex and with himself. He owed Alex the truth, and he owed himself the chance to live authentically. To finally breathe. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Mark pushed away from the window. His palms were slick, a familiar tremor beginning in his gut. He raked a hand over his jaw, feeling the nascent stubble. He hadn't shaved in a day, a small rebellion against the meticulous order he usually maintained. Now wasn't the time for precision, it was time for raw honesty. He exited his bedroom, the floorboards sighing softly beneath his weight. Each step felt momentous, leading him towards an unknown future. The scent of brewing tea and old books drifted from the living room. Alex. He pictured him, likely curled on the sofa, a book in hand, bathed in the soft morning light. As Mark neared the living room entrance, he paused, His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat presaging the imminent confrontation. This was it. No turning back. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, conjuring Alex's kind gaze, the gentle arc of his smile. He needed that image, that anchor, to steady him. He pushed the living room door wide and stepped inside. Alex sat precisely as Mark had envisioned, a leather-bound book open on his lap, a steaming mug of tea on the end table beside him. He looked up, his brow now relaxed, a soft smile gracing his lips. "Morning, sleepyhead. Tea's almost ready." The mundane normalcy of the greeting twisted a fresh knot of anxiety in Mark's gut. How do you disrupt such tranquility with something so seismic? He swallowed hard, his throat suddenly parched. He advanced into the room, stopping a few feet from Alex, his hands clasped behind his back, a posture he often adopted at attention. Old habits died hard. Alex lowered his book, sensing the shift in Mark's demeanour. His smile faded, replaced by a flicker of concern. "Everything okay?" Mark nodded, then shook his head, a confused gesture that did little to reassure Alex. He took another deep breath, the scent of bergamot from Alex's tea filling his nostrils. "Alex," he began, his voice rougher than he intended. He cleared his throat. "Alex, there's something I need to tell you." Alex's gaze sharpened, his eyes searching Mark's face. He set his book on the coffee table, offering Mark his full, undivided attention. The quiet intensity of Alex's focus was almost overwhelming. Mark's gaze flitted around the familiar room, taking in the overflowing bookshelves, the comfortable, worn armchair, the eclectic art, all testaments to Alex's gentle, thoughtful nature. This was Alex's world, a world Mark had inadvertently stumbled into and found himself irrevocably drawn to. He met Alex's eyes, a tremor running through him. This was it. The precipice. He had to jump. I've been doing a lot of thinking," Mark started, his voice gaining a fragile strength. He didn't know how to phrase it, how to package the seismic shift that had occurred within him. About us. About everything. He paused, searching for the right words, for a way to articulate the inarticulable. "And Alex, I'm in love with you." The words hung in the air, tangible and electric, filling the quiet space between them. Mark watched Alex's face, searching for any reaction, any hint of what lay beyond this terrifying confession. His heart pounded, a frantic rhythm against the sudden, profound silence. He had spoken his truth. He was ready for whatever came next.